All right, here we go. Another episode of Muscles and Magic the Gathering live. I'm going to try to go live every Wednesday night for those of you that do subscribe. Magic the Gathering is a huge passion for me. It's something that I do in my spare time. Listen, I fought in the UFC. Men's Health named me one of the 100 fittest men of all time. I write regularly for Men's Health. A big part of my life is working out in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I won a world championship last year. But in my spare time, a lot of times I'm organizing my cards and building decks. Currently, I've got 53 full Commander decks. Now, I know that seems like a lot, but I have been a collector for 30 plus years. So I've got the cards, I've got the horsepower to do it, if you will. And yeah, it's a passion of mine. It keeps me busy. It's exciting. It's fun. And there's nothing better to me than collecting and playing. I got into Commander heavy about 2 years ago. Some really good friends of mine, David and Talia, they're Magic the Gathering influencers. They actually own Coral Sword in Houston, one of my favorite Magic the Gathering shops on the planet. But they convinced me to get into Commander. Before that, I only ever played 60 card decks, and I also collected full sets. I had over 40 complete sets. Now that's not the case anymore, because to make all of these Commander decks, I had to destroy a lot of these complete sets because I needed the cards. Anyway, along the way, I've had to learn a lot about the game. Things I didn't need to think about with 60 card decks. I actually find building a 100 card deck in Commander is much more of an art than building a 60 card deck. With a 60 card deck, there's a very direct line to winning. For a CEDH deck in Commander, it's actually kind of the same thing. There's a very direct line to winning. But if you're going to build a Category 3 or a Category 4 or a high-level Category 4, those are the new categories for Commander. If you're going to build a deck that falls into one of those categories, it can actually be really difficult to build a deck, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that you need to pay attention to. So I actually am going to adjust one of my favorite decks, my Goblin deck, my Jareth's Army deck. I'll go over it a little bit, but I do want to adjust it because I had a couple of games with it. And there's a couple of cards that I want to add. Actually, there's one card in particular, but I want to go over the deck with you and talk about why I'm adding it and kind of my thought process behind it. And just like I said, some things that I needed to learn that I had to pay attention to that people might not pay attention to. So with all that said, let's dive into the deck called Jareth's Army. Now you can see the cards right here. I'm just kind of going through them. The commander for this deck, and I actually should have it at the front of my deck, but I was playing with my son earlier and just kind of shoved all the cards in my deck box. But let's see for the people watching if you can guess what the commander is. It's the ultimate commander for a Goblin deck. All right, you should know what it is. If you leave it in the comments, I'll give you a shout out. But who do you think the commander for this Goblin deck is? If you've seen some of my stuff, you would know I actually put this commander up on my channel a few days ago. And we'll see while I'm looking for it, if anyone can come through with that guess. But it is the ultimate, the #1 commander for the Goblin deck, as far as I'm concerned. And let's see if we're going to find him here. All right, keep going, keep going. Transfluence Radio Podcast says these mountains are a lot different than the ones I'm used to. Yes, they are. Mountains have evolved a lot. Like, look at that one. That is from Dominaria United. This is from Kamigawa, just a beautiful island. The art's really, really improved from the days of, I don't know when you played, but I'm old school, man. I played Unlimited, I played 4th edition, I played Ice Age, and you are right. The mountains have changed a ton. And here's the commander. There was no guesses, so I'm just going to tell you. The commander of my Goblin deck is Crinkle the Mob Boss. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about, is how the cards fit in with the commander. So a couple things to pay attention to with decks. And on this other computer, I actually have Moxfield pulled up. I find Moxfield a super great tool. Now, I don't work with them. I'm not sponsored by them. But if you are new to the Magic the Gathering community, Moxfield is a tremendous resource to keep track of your decks and keep track of the cards. Like, I've got 100 cards in here, and I play with this deck a fair amount. But it would be almost impossible for me to sit with a pen and a paper and list out every single card. Like, I don't have that kind of memory, especially as I get older. And so Moxfield helps me keep track of all my decks. So what you can't see is this computer screen, but it's got my 53 decks listed in alphabetical order. I'm going to click on Jareth's Army, my Goblin deck, and here's a little Easter egg for you. It's called Jareth's Army because it's named after the Goblin King from Labyrinth, one of my favorite movies of all time. But it brings up my deck and it lists every single card. So if I'm looking to make a substitution or looking to see what cards I have in the deck, I can actually look at them on Moxfield instead of flipping through my deck. So super useful tool. And I can display a lot of stuff on the screen. I wish you could see the screen. I wonder if I could actually show you, and I don't think I can configure the computer to do it, but I can display the price of each card on the screen. I can display the mana cost. I can display what set it's from. So all of that metadata that I need to make decisions, I can look on screen and get it in real life time versus trying to organize the cards the old school way. Transfluence Radio Podcast, by the way, it's your brother. Thought I'd jump on and see what you were up to. Mikey, how the hell are you? It's good to see you, brother. And you are right. This is my brother, Mikey. One of my best friends growing up. And he's a damn good brother. But he used to play Magic the Gathering with me as well. And yeah, Mikey, the lands have changed a lot since we used to play in high school at St. Charles College. Anyway, you get all the mana values, all the card names. And they're all sorted on Moxfield too, by the way. They're sorted by creature, they're sorted by sorcery, they're sorted by instant. So this tool helped me a lot. Now, another piece of metadata that this website gives you is it tells you the total mana value of the deck. Now, that's not something I paid attention to when I first started building. But as I started playing Commander more, it's something that became very important to me. And the total mana value of the deck is all the mana symbols in the cards added together. Now, land doesn't technically have a mana symbol, so it's 0. You have 100 cards in the deck. This would be 4. There's 2 red and 2 colorless. For the purpose of mana value, you count them all the same. The Vanquisher's Banner would be a 5. The Howl Squad Heavy would be a 3. So you start adding all these cards together, and I'm actually going to raise this so it'll be a little more focused for you. And so what you do is you add all the cards, all the mana symbols together, and you get the total mana value. Now, the number that I use for competitive decks is 200. I've done a lot of research on this, and that's a number that I have settled on, that if the deck is under 200 for total mana value, it moves really fast. And what I mean by moves really fast is you'll hear the term you can get your deck off. So whatever strategy you're trying to play, if you're trying to win, it just moves super fast. Whereas if you had a total mana value of 400, the deck would move really, really slow. And if you're playing competitive Magic, you want the deck to go off fast. Now, I try to make all my decks under 200. Really hard to do with an Eldrazi deck or with a Dragon deck. Like creatures with bigger casting costs. With Goblins, it's actually a lot easier, because a lot of the Goblins have low casting costs. Moxfield also keeps track of your total mana value, because imagine you had to go through this and add them up all one by one. It would take forever, right? And if you ever made a substitute to a card, it would be really, really hard to track. So I like Moxfield as a tool for that. So this deck now, it currently sits at 165, and the deck moves lightning fast. Like a lot of times with my Goblin deck, if I get a good hand, I am going to win turn 4 or under. Especially with Krenko, the mob boss, is your commander. If you get a good opening hand, like if you were to get a mountain, you were to get a Soul Ring, and you were to get a Jeweled Lotus, you're bringing out a lot of Goblins. You're bringing out Krenko right away. You're going to multiply your Goblins, and you're going to run the opponent right over. But one of the key strategies of this deck involves a god card called Perforce, all right? And I'm going to show you how this combos here. So we're going to look for Perforce, and just for the purposes of this game, or not this game, this live, there's Perforce. I am going to take some Goblins out to show you how this works, all right? And I'm going to show you how this combo works. It's one of my favorite combos when you're playing Goblins. If you're building a Krenko deck, I think you need a Perforce in it to be competitive. It's a huge win condition. What you're trying to do with Krenko is make as many goblins as possible and then run your opponent over. Now, sometimes that doesn't happen, so Perforce can act as, a secondary win condition. And I say secondary, a lot of times Perforce ends up being the primary win condition. And I really want to show you that combo. I have no idea where I put my Krenko. It's got to be around here somewhere, so I can show you how this works. Here we go, Krenko the Mob Boss. All right, so let's show you how this works. So let's say I'm playing a game, and pretend I've got enough mana out, and I've got a couple of goblins, right? So I've got Krenko, I've got Krenko Tin Street Pin, I've got the Goblin Churgeon, I've got the Goblin Lackey, I've got the Goblin Sharpshooter, and I have a Perforce. Now let's read Krenko first of all, in case you're not familiar. With Krenko the Mob Boss, you're going to create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. So basically what you're going to do, you're going to tap Krenko, you're going to count up the goblins you control, 1, 2, 3, 4. That means I'm going to make 4 1/1 goblin creature tokens. Now I have 8 creatures on the battlefield. The next turn, if I double it, that 8 turns to 16. The next turn, if I double it, that 16 turns to 32. You can see how goblins can get out of control in a hurry. Well, now let's look at the Perforce card and how this combos with that. It's indestructible, so it's really hard to remove. As long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Perforce isn't a creature, which makes it super hard to target. And whenever another creature, and this is the key text on this card, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Perforce deals 2 damage to each opponent. So imagine using Krenko and this together. I tap Krenko, I make 4 goblins. 4 goblins come onto the battlefield. For each creature that enters the battlefield, I do 2 damage to each opponent. 4 times 2 is 8, that's 8 damage to each opponent. Not just one opponent, to every opponent at the table. And a lot of times in Commander, you're playing a 4-person game. Now, sometimes it's head-to-head Commander, sometimes it's 3 people, but if you're playing 4 people, you're going to do 8 damage to each person at the table. Now remember, now I have 8 goblins out, and the next turn I tap, and I make 16 tokens. Wow, right? So now 16 times 2 is 32 damage to each player at the table. In a couple of turns, if I have this hand, I can wipe people out. So I'm going to do 8 damage. Next turn, I'm going to do 16. Next turn, I'm doing 32 damage to each player at the table, and game is over. So that's why I have this combo. Now, one of the cards that I need to get is a mini Perforce. And so I want to see if I can find it right now. Hopefully I have it aside, and we'll look at some cards. I got a Balanced Tomb. I just bought that the other day. An Ancient Tomb. I need that for a deck, a mono black deck I'm building. Pitiless Plunderer. Evereth, Viceroy of Plunder. And what I'm looking through right now, this is like my extra stash of cards that I can stick in decks. Impact Tremors, that's the card I want. But I'll show you a couple other cards just for fun. Muddle the Mixture, Last Chance, Ragavan, the Nimble Pilferer, Rishkar Pima Renegade, Ascended Pack Leader. This is a channel card. I don't know if you guys remember the old channel Fireball combo. You could kill somebody turn 1. Path to Exile, Young Wolf, Chaos Warp, Ancient Bronze Dragon, great card for a green counter deck. Commander Sphere, Immer Wolf, Secret Lair version. Yeah, so I got just a lot of extra cards. Aurelia the War Leader, great card in a white and red deck. Delighted Halfling. Just some highlights here. Ooh, Eldrazi Monument. Now that almost could go in my Goblin deck. That's the one of the ones I cut, but I really, really wanted it in there. Coat of Arms almost made the cut. All right. So just kind of a lot of extra cards. Ooh, look at that beautiful Phyrexian language, Nissa. Ooh, an old school Vampiric Tutor. Check this out. It's a beautiful card. All right. I think that's the first printing of the Vampiric Tutor. So anyway, a lot of cards in here. But what I wanted to highlight today was Impact Tremors. Now, someone came on my channel and made a comment. They're like, why don't you include an Impact Tremors in this deck? And I actually agreed with them 100%. I did need an Impact Tremors, but I didn't have the card. It had already went in my Vampire deck. And this is a great card for any deck that's creating a lot of creature tokens. And I call it a mini Perforce because remember the text on Perforce? Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Purpose deals 2 damage to each opponent. Great. Impact Tremors. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. So kind of like a mini Purpose. It does 1 damage instead of 2, but it's also an enchantment, and enchantments a lot of times are harder to remove. So I really wanted Impact Tremors in this deck, so I ordered one from TCG Player or Card Kingdom. I can't remember, but it came in the mail, and now it's time to cut something from my deck to put it in. And I look through all the cards, and the first thing I want to do is look at my least usable card. And honestly, because I'm trying to keep that mana value low, what's the highest casting cost? And the winner from this deck, and I have a lot of different cards in this deck, right? Lands don't really count. I'm not going to cut a land. I don't believe in cutting lands. Another thing with building decks is I like to have a minimum of 35 lands per commander deck. Some people that say that runs a little high, but to really be competitive in a game of Commander, I think you have to have in your opening hand 3 lands. From a lot of research that I've done, that tends to be the general thought. And there are some people that like playing with lower lands. If they play with lower lands or a lower number of lands, they'll have a lot of mana rocks. But I like a higher amount of lands. I actually just watched a podcast on this from the guys at Commandcast. Fantastic show, by the way, and some incredible people. But they tend to agree on the higher land type deal. And so with the higher lands, I'm not going to cut a land. I want to keep my lands high. My brother, Mikey, asks, do we still only start with 20 life points, or is that only in a standard game? That's only in a standard game. Commander has 40 life, so you can actually afford to lose more life in Commander, so you can be a little more liberal. So your card choices in Commander are going to be different than in Standard or Modern or Legacy, because you can afford to lose more life because you have 40, but you also have to do more damage to your opponent, and that's where something like Impact Tremors really, really helps. So anyway, I'm not going to cut a land. I've decided that first. So then I'm going to look at like what cards I'm going to cut, right? I don't want to cut the Howl Squad Heavy. It's got a low casting cost, and it gives all my other goblins haste, which has actually helped me out in a lot of games. I like the haste effect for my goblins. Vanquisher's Banner, it's a great card for a Goblin Anthem. Gives all my goblins +1/+1, and it acts as card draw, which is super important if you want to move fast. I'm not cutting that. Dockside Extortionist. This is actually a banned card in Commander right now. I think it's going to be unbanned soon. So I'm going to leave this in, but it's also an incredibly powerful card in Magic, especially to ramp up really, really fast. Brightstone Ritual. Massive mana ramp, all right? Not going to take that out. It's a casting cost of 1. The Cloudstone Curio. I got a bunch of goblins. When they enter the battlefield, they have a certain effect. This allows me to bounce them to and from my hand. I'm not going to take that out. It's only a casting cost of 3. The Jeweled Lotus. Another banned card. I'm not taking that out. It's a beautiful card, by the way. It's worth a lot of money. But it's also a great card, and I think it's going to be unbanned soon. Allows me to get my commander out sometimes turn 1. If I was to draw a mountain in this in my first hand, I can get Krenko out turn 1, and then I'm on my way to winning the game. If I can get Krenko out turn 1, I'm probably not losing that game of commander, so I'm going to keep that in. But that's my thought process as I go through the deck. Gamble, one of the only tutors in red. I believe it actually is the only tutor in red, direct tutor. Not going to take that out, casting cost of 1. So anyway, after going through all the cards, and I actually don't have to go through them like that. I could go through them on the list on Moxfield that I have up on this computer. But I look through, and there's one card, there's actually 2 cards that stuck out to me. One was Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker. The casting cost is 5 total mana. And what it does, it creates a token that's a copy of a target non-legendary creature you control, except it has haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Now, I have a bunch of non-legendary goblins in here, so it can be useful, but the person I really want to replicate is Krenko. If I could replicate Krenko using like a Helm of the Host, that's another card in this deck, then this card would go bonkers. So if Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker could actually replicate this, and it can't because this is legendary, then I would never take Kiki out. But Kiki was a consideration because of the high casting cost, and again, I haven't used it a lot in this deck. Like, I've won a lot with this deck and I've lost some games. Kiki hasn't really helped me much in this deck. But there was a situation that came up the other day. I have a card called a Skirk Fire Marshal in this deck, and it also stands out because it's got the higher casting cost. But read this. Protection from red. Tap 5 untapped goblins you control. Skirk Fire Marshal deals 10 damage to each creature and each player. Now that can be a win condition if I have enough goblins, right? Because I can do a lot of damage to each player and each creature. The problem is I'm part of each creature and I'm part of each player. That is a problem. So if I tap 5 untapped goblins, and yes, I can make the tokens with Krinko, but if I want to do the table for 10 damage each, I got to do myself for 10 damage. And I don't want to do that. Read the card. This is really important to read the text on the card. Skirk Fire Marshal deals 10 damage to each creature and each player. I'm one of those players. And so there was a situation the other day I was playing against a vampire deck. I had a bunch of goblins on the field and I wanted to do a bit of a board wipe. But if I would have used this, I would have board wiped myself and done myself a lot of damage. And so that didn't work for me because I need those goblins, because the more goblins I have on the battlefield, the more copies I can make of them with Krinko. So I realized that putting this in this deck might not have been the best choice, if you will. So that's the one I want to get rid of. And hopefully that logic makes sense to you, because I want, you'll hear people talk about something called asymmetrical board wipes, where I get to wipe out all your creatures, but my creatures stay intact. Unfortunately, this is not asymmetrical. If I do 10 damage to each creature and each player, I'm going to wipe out all my creatures as well, which honestly really, really sucks. So I do not want to do that. Oh, look what I just found. A random Yawgmoth's Will sitting around. So Skirk Fire Marshal is getting cut from this deck. Now, the other card I'm looking for, and I just had it because I showed you, was that Impact Tremors. And I don't know where I put it now. The joys of making decks. So let me look through. Oh, here it is. I found it. I stuck it back in my sleeved cards. This happens sometimes. Highly disorganized on Muscles and Magic the Gathering, but I am a meathead. All right. So we can't not put this in. Well, we cannot put this in because it's black, but it's a great card. But I wanted to show you a Yawgmoth's Will. I have a random one lying around, not in a sleeve. Don't yell at me. All right, so we are going to make this simple change. The Skirk Fire Marshal that can hurt me, that's got a high casting cost for Impact Tremors, which is an enchantment. It's got a lower casting cost, and it's asymmetrical because it's going to damage each opponent, and it happens to work better with Krinko Mob Boss. Because now, imagine I don't get to my Perforce. Now I can use this like a Perforce combo, or if I want to make 12 creature tokens, 12 damage to the opponent. Imagine I had this and Perforce out. If I had Perforce out that does 2 damage for every creature that comes in, if I had Krinko Mob Boss out and make 12 tokens, I do 24 damage for the Perforce and another 12 for the Impact Tremors. That's 36 damage to every single person sitting at the table. I am not going to lose that game. This becomes a real problem. So, Skirk Fire Marshal, I love you. You could be a great card, but I found in our games you are not helping me. I had him out in another game that I lost, and he just couldn't help me. So he is making the cut. You are the weakest link. Goodbye. So here's how I do this. I go over to my Mox field. Now, my mana value was 65. We're going to take out the Skirk Prospector. We're going to remove it. The mana value just dropped. Excellent work. I took out the wrong card. Uh-oh. Who was it that I took out? It was Skirk something. This is bad. Okay. It's a creature. I know that. So we're going to look through the cards, and this actually gives you a good opportunity. This happens all the time. A little disorganization, but this is real life, right? So here we go. Hopefully you're enjoying my pain right now, because now I got to figure out which of these 100 cards that I eliminated. But luckily it's on Moxfield. This is another benefit of Moxfield, so I'm glad this happened. All my creatures are in alphabetical order, so it's somewhere with the S. It's probably a Skirk something. My guess is it's a Skirk Prospector that I accidentally deleted. So let's see. And you can kind of see my deck going through it. If there's any other cards you think I should have cut instead of Skirk Fire Marshal, please let me know as you see these cards if you have any other ideas. All right. Let's keep, oh, nice autographed Imperial Recruiter. It was the Skirk Prospector. I looked, that's what I deleted by accident, so I'm going to put him back. And it's great on Moxville because all you got to do is type him in. He is going to come up. Okay, I'm going to add him back to the deck. And what version of the card is this? It's a DOM. I can match up the printing. Okay, perfect. So Skirk Prospector is back. That's not the one we wanted to cut. That was actually easier than I thought it was going to be. But that's why we like Moxville, because otherwise I never would have figured that out. We want to get rid of the Skirk Fire Marshal. So I'm going to remove that. My mana value drops to 160, so even lower than 165. So it's going to go off super fast. We're going to take that out of the plastic. He is going to the nether regions, probably for a secondary goblin deck. We're going to put Impact Tremors in. All right. This deck just got stronger, right? If I would have had this game that I lost the other day, if I would have had the Impact Tremors instead of the Skirk Fire Marshal, I might have been able to pull that game out. So let's go to my enchantments, Impact Tremors. I want to make sure I have the right version. This is DTK. All right, so I can switch the printing. All right, boom. It's for the Dragon's Tarkir. There we go. The mana value of the deck is 162, so down from 165. And I believe this is now a stronger deck. So some real life deck tech with Bobby Maximus and Muscles and Magic, and I believe this deck is now stronger, so that makes me happy. And this is what happens, right? A lot of times you build a deck and you think it's going to work a certain way, and then you play with it a couple of times and you're like, ooh, I got to fine tune it. I feel like one of the things I love about Commander is as you play with your decks, you're never really done. Like, I'm never really finished tinkering the deck, and as new cards come out, there's a new Tarkir Dragonstorm set. My guess is there's going to be a couple of Goblin type cards in there. There might be some cards that I want to add to this deck as the new sets come out. I wonder if I can find it super quick for you. But that just happened with Ether Drift, right? The House Squad Heavy came out. Start your engines. Other goblins you control have haste. Start your engines means it's going to go to max speed at some point. Other goblins you control have your haste. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. That's great for Krenko. And then max speed, you add mana for each goblin you control. I'm actually going to look up exactly what start your engines means so I can give you a idea of how that mechanic works exactly. So this does relate to the max speed. Start your engines. Here we go. It's a keyword ability introduced in Ether Drift. It's associated with speed. The first time in a game you control permanent with start your engines, your speed becomes 1. This happens immediately, so no one can respond and try to remove the permanent before you pick up speed. Once your speed is 1 or greater, you can trigger an ability to increase your speed. That ability is whenever one or more opponents lose life during your turn. If your speed is less than 4, increase your speed by 1. This ability triggers once each turn. So in a few turns, you can get to max speed, and you can really take advantage of this for mana ramp, which is really useful in this deck. So with giving the goblins haste, with creating tokens that help with Krenko, and the max speed option to really get some mana for your deck. And I don't know how you guys like max speed. I'm not sure how I like it so far, but it certainly really helps in this deck. I don't know how it's helping in my other decks yet, but I'm sure I will figure that out. But anyway, point is, this card I thought would be useful in this deck, especially with the low casting cost, the token creation, and the mana creation. And so I thought it worked really well with Krenko. So a card got cut and that went in. I can't remember what card I cut right now, but I thought that worked better. So as cards come out, you will have the ability to just add to your deck and add to your deck and add to your deck. And so you're never really done. And that's something that I really, really love about the game, that it's forever evolving and changing. And so I find that really cool. So that is some real life deck tech with Bobby Maximus. Hopefully you learned a little bit from this. Some things that I had to learn about Commander that were honestly, frankly, kind of difficult for me, especially coming from 60 card decks and collecting sets. And that is kind of my, Blood Moon. That is also in my Goblin deck. Super strong for a red mono deck. That's an auto include if you're building a red mono deck to wipe out other people's non-basic lands and prevent them from messing around with you. So that is some real life deck tech with Bobby Maximus for the Muscles and Magic the Gathering. It's not a podcast. It's a YouTube channel where I display my decks. I put up some funny shorts, and I will start a podcast type format soon, which I think we're going to call Magic for Dummies. Just helping people out that are new to the game to try and reduce the learning curve that I had to learn. So thanks for coming with me for another live. These lives, I will be doing pack openings. I'll be doing some deck tech. I'll talk about some cards. I'll do some set reviews. I'd appreciate if you could get me some supers. Supers really help me create. I would appreciate it if you subscribed, turn your notifications on, and share this with your friends. But thank you for sharing my passion with me. I absolutely love this game. I love people in the community, and it's a really big part of my life. So thank you for stopping by, and I love you all. And with that, we will end the stream. I'm about to go do some push-ups and eat a giant steak, and then